Good evening all, this is N7GES. Welcome to the NCARC Tech Net. We discuss various amateur-related materials. Some are more complex than others. We try to reach out to the newbie as well as other more experienced amateurs. We meet each Monday evening. We respect each other's opinions, and we are controlled in that I do ask that you give me your call suffix, and then I can acknowledge you when we're actually having discussions. If we have a trouble with the repeater, we'll go to the 145.115 repeater, which is the other Horsetooth repeater. If for some reason that goes, we may go to the Budweiser repeater. But I don't think we'll have that much trouble. We'll begin with check-ins to see who we've got this evening. Who would like to check in tonight?
This is KE0OXB, Scott Fort Collins, and good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, Kevin and the net. This is Whiskey 0, Delta Delta Zulu, W0DDZ, Dave and Greeley.
Kilo 0, Papa Romeo Bravo, and Kilo 0, Lima Alpha Oscar in Loveland.
Good evening, Kevin. This is Kilo Echo 0, Lima Sierra Lima, Al and Greeley.
All right. Good evening to the following, and welcome KE0LSL, K0LAO, K0PRB, W0DDZ, and KE0OXV. Who else is around this evening?
Good evening, Kevin. Kilo Delta 0, Tango Yankee Uniform, Joe in Loveland.
Hi, Kevin. This is Whiskey 0 Alpha Sierra Papa, Terry in Berthoud.
Okay, welcome to KD0TYU and W0ASP. Anybody else want to check in before we begin?
This is Kilo Delta 0 Whiskey Bravo Charlie Pete in Fort Collins.
Hi, Kevin. This is N0EMP, November 0, Echo Mike Papa. Did you copy Debbie's login? I think we bumped the channel selector here, handing the radio over.
Okay. Good evening, N0EMP. No, I did not. Is it N0DBE? I'm not sure I got that prefix right.
Kilo.
Yeah, you got out of the null there. K0, correct? Okay, you're right in the border of a bad spot there. Anyway, welcome Debbie and Greg, and Pete, KD0WBC. Thanks all. Anybody else before we continue?
Hey, Kevin, K0PRB. You missed Joe, TYU, and you mentioned ASP, but I didn't hear him check in.
You missed a lot then. I did acknowledge TYU unless somebody jumped over me, and ASP did check in right after Joe did, and I think I acknowledged him there. Anybody else I may have missed or think I missed or anything of that nature, or anybody else that wants to come?
KC0 RBT.
WA3 YNF Dave in Fort Collins.
This is K1DEG. K1DEG in Platteville.
November 0 Bravo November Kilo. Rick, Fort Collins.
Okay, let's welcome N0BNK, K1DEG, WA3YNF, KC0RBT. There was a double. Did I miss anybody? Okay, well, then we'll assume that we haven't. I should indicate right away, if you have comments or questions or topic suggestions for the TechNet, please email elmers@ncarc.net. That's ELMERS. Like the people that coach you through amateur radio years ago and hopefully are still doing these days as well at Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. You can also make comments on the YouTube feed, which is also going out, and remember that feed's available if you can't listen on the radio. Also, you can check in via Echolink at W0UPS-R. So any of those ways are ways to communicate with us for the TechNet. Let's get started with our topic then. Let me open it up first before we do. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask before we start off? Okay, I trust not. So our topic tonight is very brief, open-ended to some degree. HF bands and when to use them. There's a lot and why. There's a lot of things we can say here. We have a lot of band choices. We all know that they do not all work at the same times of days or with the same qualities. And so it probably would be a good idea to discuss what makes some of these work at certain times, or what makes certain bands work better at certain times than others. I think it could be enlightening. It could lead to questions and hopefully to some good discussion. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let me pick on somebody. Terry, W0ASP. Would you like to maybe get us started with some thoughts on this?
Okay, Kevin. Yeah, this can be a fairly deep rabbit hole, especially on a lot of the details. But the fundamental principle is if you're using HF, you're using signals reflected off the Earth's ionosphere, somewhere between 100 and 300 miles high. That is a naturally varying layer, which has lots of characteristics, just like the weather. There's day and night, there's seasonal variations, there's variations with the 11-year solar cycle, and there are things called sporadic E, which tend to be seasonal in the hemispheric summer. So it's all a matter of picking a frequency which the ionosphere will then reflect from you to the location you want to communicate with. W0ASC.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to continue this?
It's Kilo Delta Zero, Katie 0TYU.
Go ahead, Joe.
Define your question. Are we just talking about when to use the bands or what the bands are like? Or I guess Terry basically told you exactly how they work. So what is the question, I guess?
Well, I think the question was purposely open for various discussions. But I did say that we know that there's a lot of band choices, and they don't all work the same way, nor do they all work at the same times of the day. And I thought it would be a good idea to discuss why that is, and some guides to which bands work better at what times and in what conditions.
Oh, very good, very good. Good discussion, good discussion. Well, to me, and Terry can actually tell me if I'm wrong or not, nighttime is 40 and 80 if you get lucky. 160, I've never worked it. 20 can be daytime and maybe 15 or 17 if you get lucky. But 20 is usually a daytime band. I don't know, and everybody else would have to agree. I mean, disagree or agree with that. I don't know.
Okay. Any other volunteers on information here?
N0EMP.
EMP, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin in the net. There's a subset of HF communication I'm interested in called NVIS, Near Vertical Incident Skywave, which is a fancy way of saying that you're trying to shoot your RF pretty much straight up towards the ionosphere and have it come down on a cone of about 200 or 300 miles radius. And the propagation, the maximum usable frequency when you do that is less than if you're shooting down at a low angle. So for low angle DX, you might be able to run 20 meters or depending on the sunspot cycle, even 10 meters. That doesn't work straight up. There's a thing called critical frequency, which you can find from the Boulder ionosonde, and it's usually below 8 megahertz. So for NVIS, you're talking 80 meters, 60 meters, and 40 meters. 160, there's a lot of absorption going straight up in the D layer. So it's those three bands for NVIS, 80, 60, and 40.
Okay, very good. And the reason for that, let me just clarify and see if I'm stating it properly, is for nearer or closer in communications, such as regional and close state nets and that sort of thing, right? Correct?
Right. It's more of an emergency services kind of thing and a local, regional thing. If if I'm having a really bad day, although Denmark is full of wonderful people, they probably can't help me right away. So I want to talk to people, that are within my county preferably, or at least, the state. The other thing with NVIS is you can be down in a valley somewhere with high terrain all around you, and you can shoot up and down and talk to people in your region, even if you don't have anything that's anywhere near line of sight.
KD0TYU with a question.
TYU, go.
Hey, Greg, does that make any difference? Does atmospheric conditions make any difference on the NVIS stuff?
Not too much. You're still using the ionosphere, so there is some variation there. But as a general rule of thumb, 80 meters at night, 40 meters during the day, and even in low sunspot cycles like we're in right now, those are pretty reliable. And then 60 meters is kind of, split the difference.
Okay. So then that brings me a question too. What's going on with high noon net on 40 meters these days over at noon? Is it just that a lot of us aren't using NVIS antennas, or what's going on there? Because, or is that more space oriented rather than weather environmental oriented?
Well, I don't normally check in there. I've worked them before, and I've worked them with an NVIS antenna, and I'll clarify what that can be in a minute here. Has there been some problem talking to them lately that wasn't there before?
It's been a lot more of a problem in recent years than when I started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it varies, of course, from week to week quite a bit.
Okay. Well, your typical amateur radio HF antenna for someone that's trying to work DX is either going to be a vertical with a radial field, or it's going to be a dipole or a beam that's at least half wave up above the ground, and those are people trying to work DX. For NVIS, since you want to shoot straight up, a low dipole works just fine. And for that, for 80 meters or 40 meters, 20 feet, 25 feet up is plenty. In an emergency, you can run a dipole a foot off the ground on 80 meters and it will work, although you're heating the ground up with a lot of your energy, but it will work. So a typical NVIS antenna is horizontal and it's lower to the ground, less than a quarter wavelength above ground. And if the person on the other end is using a low angle antenna, like a vertical or a high dipole, you're not going to get as much coupling as if they're also using a low horizontal antenna. But I've worked up into Wyoming just fine on 40 with my NVIS antennas and 0 EMP.
Rickety broke, please.
Good evening, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, WD0LEV. To answer your question about the high noon net, I didn't monitor today, but I usually do, just to get an idea of propagation. And the F0, F2 frequency has been around noon hanging 4 to 5 megahertz for quite some time. Occasionally it'll push 6, but very seldom over the last year. As such, your radiated RF energy is just going to go off into space. That's why the high noon net has trouble. If you're out where the lower angle stuff on 40 meters at noon is going to work, yeah, it might work. But of late, again, learn to use the Boulder ionogram, which Greg alluded to. That will tell you why. W0LEV.
Okay, but it's more solar related than as to actual weather conditions then. Am I understanding that right, Dave?
Yeah, local or distributed weather conditions have really minimal effect on HF propagation.
Okay, very good. And 7GES with the TechNet. Okay, very good. So we've had just a little bit of description already as to why certain bands at night and certain bands during the day. We know some of that is there. Are there other? I'm sure some of this has to do with wavelengths as well, and that sort of thing. I'm rambling. I apologize. Would anybody else like to offer some other information as to? We've kind of talked time of days. Maybe what we should discuss a bit more is weather conditions. We know the space weather situations vary a lot, but what other factors affect it on a fairly regular basis that we could know even without looking at the space weather conditions?
W0ASP, I can handle that.
ASP, go ahead.
The one thing we really haven't talked about yet, as far as HF propagation, is this thing called the ionospheric D layer, as in delta. And this is a layer which absorbs your radio energy. It's about 60 kilometers high, 40 miles. And the absorption of the ionospheric D layer is roughly inversely proportional to the square of the frequency. So if you double your frequency, you will get 1/4 of the loss, and that's in decibels. So what you want to do in daytime is use the highest frequency you can that still reflects off the F layer. This is why you really can't use 160 meters a night.
Node 1, 2, 7, 5, time out.
Because this ionospheric D. And 80 will.
Okay, yeah, we lost part of the end of your transmission there, and that was partially my fault for not letting the timer reset. Thank you. Can you just summarize again so that we can catch up on what we missed there? What I got was D-layer, which is absorbing energy. When you double the frequency, you square the loss. Is that correct? And there was a bit more beyond that I missed.
Yes, I'll repeat and rephrase. There's this ionospheric D layer, which is directly generated by the sun, And as soon as the sun comes up, it appears. As soon as the sun goes down, it disappears. This absorbs radio energy with the square of frequency in decibels, so the reciprocal. So that if you double your frequency, your absorption goes down by a factor of 4 in decibels. So this is why the lower frequency bands work at night and not in the daytime.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you. So we're directly related to sun as far as frequency and bandwidth in those kind of conditions. We know lightning creates a lot of static issues. Those are going to be more prevalent at lower frequencies. Am I correct there?
Kevin, yes, you are correct. Again, for two reasons. One is that the lightning strike generates more noise at the lower frequency, and two, that the signal can actually propagate better at the lower frequency than at the higher frequency. If the lightning energy is above 10, 12 megahertz, it penetrates into space and doesn't come back down to you.
Okay, very good. What about things like moisture in the air? We know that moisture and rain affects VHF and UHF a lot. What about HF communications?
Moisture in the atmosphere has very little effect on HF propagation. Moisture in the ground around your antenna, however, may change its propagation pattern and its efficiency.
Okay, very good. Any other comments anybody wants to add to all of the things we've been talking about thus far?
TYU.
TYU, go.
How about the cheat sheets?
Okay, what are you talking about?
Well, for when I first started HF, which was a long time ago, but they still had this, I asked the question, how do you know who's on? And no one could tell me. Well, you check the beacons and all the rest of that stuff. And then Radio Dan got with me and James and talked about DX Summon and DX Heat. And basically, if you've never heard of those, they're online services that basically tell you who's on. And if you remember James's presentation on that, he mentioned something about that at one of the NCARC meetings and actually showed you what that was. It's definitely a good service. It'll tell you who's on, what they're at. And it's, there's a lot of things out there on this thing. I use it continually when I'm doing HF because if you want to talk to somebody, find out where they are, you look this up. It tells you what frequencies and where they're at. Let this drop for a minute. There is only one issue is that you can find out who's on, but you never know who reported it. It could be a guy in New Jersey, and he's talking to a guy in China, and you may not be able to get him. But it's a good shot. I mean, it's something to look at and find out who's on and when they're on. Now, you may not, like I said, because of conditions and or where you're at compared to who actually reported it, you may not be able to get them. But it's a good thing. You can check out different types of contests that are going on, and we've got W9IMS coming in here pretty quick, so those type of things are all recorded there. So it's a good thing to check out. Back to you, Kevin.
Okay, Joe, thank you. And of course, one is still going to have to pay very close attention to what they know about the HF bands to know whether a particular station may be available to you at the particular frequency they're on at the particular time of day or in the conditions that you might be experiencing. So that's important to know as well as we're discussing here. Any other band condition related things that we might want to notice as we may tend to choose a band to use? Okay. I wasn't thinking particularly of going into space weather too much. I was sort of thinking we might want to save that to another day. However, maybe we should go ahead and address that just a bit, because I know we've got folks on here that can tell us a lot about it. There are things that spread into our atmosphere from outside that affect it greatly, and those things vary probably even a bit more from day to day than even our local weather conditions, perhaps. So anybody want to get us started on that?
W0ASP, I can try.
I'm sure you can do more than try. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, generally the term space weather refers to the effects of the sun on the Earth's upper atmosphere and therefore the ionosphere. And we all know the ionosphere reflects our HF bands, so therefore it affects our propagation. Solar activity, including the 11-year sunspot cycle, magnetic storms, and things called coronal holes, all change the amount and type of energy and activity coming from the sun hitting the Earth. And the effect on the ionosphere is very, very difficult to predict.
Okay, but we do have predictions happening. Obviously, that's based on a lot of research and a lot of new technology, I'm sure. Can you tell us a bit more about how much of that is prediction and how much of that is reporting what's currently happening?
All of the space weather forecasts, I think, outside the Department of Defense, are qualitative in nature, in that they will tell you that something happened on the sun, little, big, huge, and that something will happen to our near-Earth space environment, little, big, huge, and approximately the time. They very rarely say that the ionosphere will increase or decrease or what the actual change will be, only the size of the effect.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Other comments? I was thinking of something I might have wanted to ask, and I'm not sure that I've got it. We're dealing with a time delay issue here too, as I understand it, and that's why it might seem like a forecast, even though it's not. So correct me if I'm wrong. We're dealing with something happening at the sun area, but it's going to take a while to get to us. So we know something is going to affect our radio communications in a certain amount of time, but not necessarily in what way, but an idea of how strongly that effect is going to be, and approximately the time that it could set in. Is that correct?
Yes. When the sun makes an eruption of plasma, there are two things we don't know. We know when it happens, thanks to modern satellites. We don't know the speed at which it's traveling between Sun and Earth, and we don't quite know the path that it's taking through space. So whether this blob of plasma, called a coronal mass ejection, will hit the Earth. So we see the flash, but it takes a long time to hear the bang, and sometimes the bang doesn't hit us.
Alrighty. Thank you for the simplification of terms there. I think that helps me, certainly, understand just a tiny bit more about what this is, what's happening, and maybe the newcomer as well. So we have some basic principles here, I think. Daytime and nighttime, changing what frequency ranges we might want to use. We have some other variations there as well, and the space weather conditions. The sun is highly related, sunrise and sunset. Can someone talk a little bit more about gray line? We've heard about it we may have heard about it several times. Perhaps we can get a little more of a description of it. Goodness gracious. If I try to describe this, I'll have to get my extra class materials out and look through them, and I think it would take me too long to locate good descriptions to bring across here. So I'm certainly hoping somebody can maybe come up with a good basic description to give us here more quickly than I could. Dave, Levy, are you still with us? You want to give us a little bit of info about gray line? EMP, Greg, how about you?
I was afraid of that, Kevin. The little bit I know about it, first of all, I know what the gray line is. It's like the dawn or dusk line, and there are maps you can look at online in real time, or there's fancy wall clocks you can get, poster-sized things that light up and have a map of the world, and they show in real time where the gray line is, which is the line running generally north-south, where the sun's either just rising or just setting. And I know there can be some real good HF propagation there. And you've just heard the sum total of everything I know about gray line.
Let me see. PRB, you've gone through the extras and stuff like that. Is this something you remember or want to discuss a little bit, or am I putting you too much on the spot? Wow. I chased everybody away. Well, I may have to come back to you, Terry, ASP. I know you can tell us something about this.
Actually, Kevin, this is W0ASP. Not really. I don't have a lot of experience with gray line propagation. other than it is the literal twilight zone of communication, and all kinds of strange phenomena happen between the hours and the hour between sunrise and sunset. As Greg said, there's a remarkable opportunity for propagation, but it's complicated.
Okay, well, that that's more, that's a bit more information than I had, and I appreciate that. The complexity. I assume that it's still based on our sunrise and sunset, not other parts of the world. Is that correct?
No, gray line propagation can involve ducting, where you can get, instead of the ionosphere acting like a mirror, it acts more like a pipe. And you can get energy into a duct, D-U-C-T, and it can propagate around the world, and then come out of that duct with surprising amount of signal strength. So this is why it's complicated.
Okay, so are we kind of saying then that we could receive the benefits of it at times other than our dusk or dawn? Is that correct?
Oh, generally not. I think that propagation tends to be limited to the terminator, either sunrise or sunset.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to clarify is somewhere in the world there's always a sunrise going on and a sunset going on. So I was sort of trying to assume that whether that gray line communications is going to affect us mostly at our sunrise and sunset times, or are we liable to reap the benefits of it when the sun is rising or setting in other areas? Are we liable to hear their communications better? Does that make better sense? Or am I just re-asking what you've already described?
Kevin, you've done a better job at stating a question that I don't know the answer to.
Okay, I will accept that. Thank you. That's good to know, because we hear a fair amount of talk about it at various times, but it seemed to me there were a lot of things about it I certainly didn't understand from the descriptions I got, and was just wondering if that was just my own understanding. So I'm glad to hear that it isn't just what I picked up. This is N7GES, and this is the NCARC Tech Net. Any more factors we should consider? We've talked about weather conditions. We've talked about solar and space weather conditions to some degree. Bandwidths. Band frequency ranges and wavelengths. What about modes? Are those time or daytime related, weather related when it comes to the HF bands? We know that they affect. I think I remember that we know that they are affected somewhat differently in the VHF, UHF bands. But what about HF and different modes? Well, I am duly and rightly embarrassed that I've either grabbed a topic that is that has scared people away, or that I'm asking somewhat overcomplicated questions or obvious things or something that I'm not getting answers, and I apologize if I have chased anybody away or caused anything like that. Any other comments anybody would like to make about propagation, different propagations related to the HF bands and comparing one band to another? Let's state it that way and open it up a bit more perhaps and see if we can get some other comments or questions.
TYU.
WI5 Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
We had two stations. TYU, go.
TYU with a question.
Yeah, go ahead, TYU.
Yeah, this might be for Terry or even Greg or somebody a lot smarter than me, which is about anybody on the net, I guess. Gray line propagation, does it make any difference if you're going north to Russia or south or east or west? Does the direction make any difference as far as that goes, as far as propagation goes?
I'm sorry, Joe. I really can't even hazard a guess to that. W0ASP.
Well, the reason I asked that question is that I've had issues going east to Europe, England especially, but I really haven't had too much trouble going north to Russia, and I realize it's a little bit closer, kind of, to us, but, and you know, it can be afternoon over there and later on at our place, but I guess I was just curious if that made a difference.
MIC.
MIC, go.
W2MIC. Yeah, Joe, it does. And what it is the tilt of the Earth. And here in the northern hemisphere, if it's summer and we're leaning into the sun, that edge of sunlight versus darkness is over the northern hemisphere, and it's easier to get over to Russia, and I used to do that. In the winter, when we in the northern hemisphere are pointing away from the sun, the majority of that solar energy on that gray line is to the south of us, and it's much easier to get to South America.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And welcome this evening. I appreciate you being here. Any more comments? I don't know how long you've been here. Any more comments you might like to make about Gray Line? We've come up with a pretty much of a blank from a lot of folks here. It is to what its effects are, where it affects, what time of the day can we expect to see those effects. I do know that we've got another station, and I will get to you in just a second, but wanted to ask Mark about this first to see if he can add anything to what we had, where we had a lot of actual empty space here.
I've heard the last few minutes. What I can add is that, yes, for us, gray line occurs for us at our dawn and our dusk. And as several people said, there are good maps you can look up, either ones you can hang on your wall or you can go look it up on the computer, and you can see by season where the gray line is from us to other places, north and south. And those are the places that you can talk to, typically just as the sun is breaking the horizon and typically just a little after dusk. So for everybody concerned on the gray line communication, it's their and our local dawn and dusk.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Very good. Okay, we had a WI5 station, I believe. Come again, please.
Whiskey Yankee 5, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. It's Justin.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, mostly wanted to comment. I did have a question, but that other station pretty much, they kind of explained the question I had as well as far as the propagation along the gray line there. But I'm mobile here. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be able to stick with you, but I just wanted to say real quick, really enjoying this. I actually wish I wasn't mobile. I'd be taking some notes here if I wasn't driving. Anyway, thanks. Whiskey Yankee 5, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
Okay, very good. Well, remember, it's being streamed on YouTube, and it will be a video you can replay later. So feel free to take advantage of that and make notes and that sort of thing. And I'm certainly glad you're enjoying it. Very good. Any other questions or comments from anybody?
TYU with a comment.
TYU.
This is kind of an overlying thing. It really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. But I want to commend Kevin. I gave him this TechNet, and he's taken it to new heights. If everybody knows, we now have a grand total of 201 members, which is a remarkable number that we never had before. And I think a lot of it is due to Kevin's efforts on that. So I do applaud it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. I don't know if that's really justified or not, but I thank you. And if you think it has done that much good, I'm certainly glad to have helped out with that. All right. Do we have other TechNet questions? It looks like we've kind of run most of the questions and comments about HF bands and propagation. So do we have other questions either about that topic or other TechNet topics, beginner or advanced topics, that anybody would like to pose at this time?
ASP with a comment.
ASP, go.
Okay, Kevin. Well, first it's hard to clap and key the microphone at the same time, but yeah, you're doing a great job. And I would like to pose the question you didn't ask.
Okay, good idea. We've had some very interesting changes in the propagation on those bands, 6 meters and 10 meters here lately. Anybody like to make some comments on why?
Well, Kevin, I have the physics reason, but I'm also interested in hearing people's experience, W0ASP.
Okay. Well, let's talk the physics first, and then let's hear what people have experienced, if that's okay, unless you want to go the other way.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to drive everybody out with the boring physics, but essentially it's a phenomenon called sporadic E, which is a layer of reflecting plasma that's fairly low and very dense, about 100 kilometers altitude, and it's related to summertime because it's caused by thunderstorm and atmospheric activity from down below affecting the lower levels of the ionosphere. So technically this is not space weather. This is ionosphere weather driven by terrestrial weather.
Well, that certainly wasn't that long and boring, and simplified it a lot, and I appreciate that. That's very interesting. Okay, what kind of experiences have people been having? I know we've had some very interesting times here lately. Anybody like to comment on what they've been experiencing? 6 and 10 meters?
This is WY7KY.
Good evening. Remind me the name again, sir.
Yeah, good evening to everyone on the net. Name here is Tom. We're in Cheyenne.
Okay, very good. What's your comment, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, well, recently what I've been seeing is morning openings on 10 and 6, but they're very short-lived, or they have been. They'll pop up pretty good. You'll get some stations from who knows where. Really, it's a that's what I call it, the mystery band. So, but I have talked to stations in Tennessee from here, just using a wire and 100-watt radio, and on 6 at least, and a few QSOs on 10. So that's my experience lately.
Oh, very good. Actually, that's the same experience I had, I think, was Tennessee. I'm trying to think what the other one was. Similar area, I believe, but I don't have my log right in front of me. Anybody else would like to make comments there?
Query.
Query, go.
Yeah, this is WA3YNF. When you make those contacts on 10 meters and 6 meters, is this single sideband or are you using FM? And is there a particular place that everybody hangs out on those two bands that you'd be more prone to make a contact? Back to you, Kevin, WA3YNF.
Okay. Anybody want to take that? Particular mode and particular frequency range.
BNK. Sales, well, I guess I will. Kitties are two-way here. Most generally, it's always single sideband. I do know that some guys actually work AM, which I've never tried, to be honest with you, but I know OJ does it, some other guys, which would be kind of cool if the guy could do it, but I just pretty much stay on sideband.
Okay, and BNK?
Yeah, for the most part, people kind of hang around the call frequencies. 6 meters, it would be 50.125 upper sideband. 10 meters would be 28.400 upper sideband. And that's where most people hang out. But you can go around when the band's open and tune around, and a lot of times hear people chatting away on some other frequency close by they don't even know the band's open. So, but that's the two places to hang out, N0 BNK.
Okay, I thank you, and again, that reflects what I ran into as well. I stumbled into a conversation that was going on between some local folks in, I think, Tennessee, and they had no idea the band was open until I popped in and said hello to them, so that is the way it goes. I think there's probably a lot of chatter in the general area of those bands as well, although that's probably not exclusive. But, you know, let me see my band chart here. Novice and Tech, 28.3 to 28.5, there's probably a very good place on 10, and on 6 general. Everybody, that is, 50.1, well, to 54.0, that's pretty much the entire band there, so there's not so much of a restriction, but you're going to find SSB on the lower part of the bands and FM on the upper sections, and I'm sort of guessing that you're going to find more on SSB than FM. However, check the call frequencies, and the upper one certainly is commonly FM, so give it a listen. I put, let me reset. I have several frequencies on 6 in a scan list on my radio. The SSB ones will sit and listen for 5 seconds or so and then go on to the next. The FM frequency will go right past if there's nothing there and the squelch is closed. Yeah, it takes, 10 seconds to go through the 6, 7, 8 frequencies I think that I have in my list. If I'm not already playing with a chef, that's easy enough to put on and do that with. You could extend that to 10 meters and other bands, adding a few more, and that would add a few seconds more of time. If you're not already playing with HF, you can certainly put those channels on and at least give a listen to the calling frequencies and see what you get. Let me reset. Another thing I like to do on certainly 10 meters and maybe some on 6, but I haven't seen it as much, is listen for the beacons. In the CW area, there's a specific area for beacons, and when the band is good, you'll certainly hear CW beacons coming in as well. So that can be an indicator. And the other thing to remember too is there could be a lot of people just listening. So don't just listen. Throw out a call once in a while. See what you do, see what you get. Throw out a call for several minutes and see what happens. Especially when you've gotten a report that the band is open. Do some listening around, but throw out a call also and several times and see what happens. So that's my quick bit of advice there. Anybody else want to offer any comments or have any questions?
Whiskey Bravo 0, Uniform Whiskey Echo.
WB0 UTE, no, UWE, I'm sorry. Good evening, it's Steve, right?
Yeah, I'm going to throw in one fast comment because I don't want to trip anybody's medical equipment. The one thing that has not been brought up is aurora. Aurora is a rather interesting thing. The other is meteor scatter, and both of those are really predominant on 10 meters and roughly up. So that's my comment. WB0 UWE.
Okay, very good. And how are you doing?
It's gonna be slow, but it looks like I'm gonna make it eventually here after everything finally heals over. So I need to shut up now in case I'm tripping some poor guy's device. So you guys carry on. It's interesting listening. WB0 UWE.
Okay. Well, I am sorry I missed you when you reported in, but I'm certainly glad to hear that you're doing better, and really glad you jumped in and said hi to us there. So great to have the info. Anybody like to, whoops, what am I doing here? Anybody else like to add a little bit more to his comments regarding aurora and meteor scatter.
W0 ASP on meteors anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, Kevin, as you have heard, meteor scatter is very intermittent. If you have a 1 or 2 long second channel between 10 meters and 6 meters, but it's only going to last, if you're lucky, 10 seconds.
Okay, so that leads to some very interesting discussion at some point, perhaps, or tonight, about what digital modes one would have to use in order to make that work. But yes, interesting stuff. Remind us just a little bit of what we can hear listening for meteor scatter and how that works.
Well, the way I do it is, and we do it at the observatory here in Berthoud, is we listen to the carriers on the TV channels, 54310 megahertz, for example, on channel 2, for a station that is over the horizon. And when we hear the receiver background come up from that carrier, we can tell that there's a communication path between that transmitter that we normally can't hear and our receiver, and that's a reflection path due to a meteor.
Okay, and in sideband or CW mode, we actually hear that as an audible tone, correct?
Yeah, correct. You're picking up a tone that's due to a target that's changing in intensity and Doppler, so it tends to ping or whistle. And like I said, it'll be anywhere from a tenth of a second to maybe 10 to 20 seconds.
All right, and I believe I remember that we can hear those morning and evening, but the mornings are better because they're sort of coming toward us rather than moving away from us. Is that correct?
Yeah, this meteor scatter is from little pieces of dust out in space, and the morning is the front windshield of the Earth, and so it picks up more bugs. The evening is the back windshield of the Earth, and there's not so many bugs.
I love that analogy. But it makes good sense and it works. Okay, very good. What about the aurora? Can anybody talk about that with me a little bit? That one is one I've heard about but really know nothing about. This is N7GES. UWE, you wouldn't want to take a risk and give us a little bit more description on that, would you? That is too bad. I'd love to hear a bit more about that. I wish somebody were on that could tell us a little bit about meteor scatter. Mark, I'm sorry, the aurora. Mark, is that anything you can talk about?
W2MIC. Kevin, sorry, I have zero experience.
Okay, well, thank you for trying in any way. We may have to leave that for another time. I'm sorry we can't cover it. So I'll have to at least write down here that that's a question for another time. Any other questions or comments? Any other topics that anybody would like to ask about?
K2AD.
Oh, good evening, Doug.
Good evening. I was just scanning through and heard you, and I heard you asking something about Aurora. What are you... I'm assuming you're not talking about the city in central Colorado here, and Denver Metro. What are you looking to know about auroral propagation?
Just exactly what it is, what it does for us, what causes it, that sort of thing. We're talking about HF propagation. Original question was what bands to use when and why. We've covered atmospherics, space weather, various things like that, and the comment came up meteor scatter and aurora, or I guess northern lights. We had some good info on meteor scatter, and I just wondered what somebody could fill in on the aurora and what sort of effects it has.
Okay, well, I can give a summary of most pronounced on 6 meters, very possible to work on 2 meters, less likely on 220, and even less likely on 432. You need to be at a sufficiently north latitude to be able to see the auroral curtain, as many refer to it, and you will tend to work off of this stations at a similar latitude, but not completely isolated to that. And basically, the aurora borealis causes an ionized layer, and it's very much a moving, almost like a curtain is blowing with a window open. And let me reset my timer here. So you have this ionized curtain of energy that's the aurora borealis, as it's changing visibly if you're sufficiently north to see it. And it is possible to take your signal, aim it towards the aurora, and it will bounce off of it and come back to someone else, and you can work them. The noticeable characteristic, if it's CW, you will not get a pure sine wave tone back. You'll get a distorted, almost like a buzz. And if you are able to get single sideband through, the distortion will very much sound like somebody's whispering and almost gargling at the same time. It's hard to reproduce, but let me recycle again. It's almost like you're listening to somebody that's whispering at you, and you can just barely make it out. So typically when an aurora begins, you will have to use CW because the signal will be weak, and as it gets stronger and stronger, you can sometimes switch to single sideband. But as it gets severe phase distortion, I find I've had to switch back to CW because there's just too much distortion of the voice, and you can continue to work people. So that's the 2-cent version of auroral propagation, N7GES, K2AD.
Okay. That was very interesting, and I was writing notes like the dickens, like crazy. Anybody have any questions on that? Because that was some interesting information there that I had heard, but it had been a long time and I hadn't remembered all of those details. Do we not get some stray signals directly from the aurora at times as well?
When you say stray signals, I guess you're saying just noise levels, and I believe the answer is yes, but I've never detected any. Now let me state, I have never worked an Aurora QSO from Colorado, but I've made, I don't know, probably a couple of hundred contacts when I used to operate from upstate New York, New England, and it's really a fascinating mode. You know, it's not intuitive, but when we were operating from up there in northwest Massachusetts, I would work stations in Ohio, Michigan, and other directions, and we both were aiming our antennas due north because the other station, you're aiming at the aurora curtain or cloud, and so it's kind of not intuitive that you both have to aim your antennas north to work each other when you're east-west of one another.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I was hoping we'd get some information about that tonight, so I'm really glad you came along. The topic came up from a friend of ours that's in the hospital, and he didn't want to set his equipment around him off by talking too much about the details, so he just sort of threw out the seeds there. So thank you for coming by and giving us, filling in some details there. And it's nice to have you over here anyway. This is N7GES, and this is the NCARC Tech Net. Again, I will ask any questions either about this topic or any other tech topics, beginner or otherwise, that anybody would like to ask. Okay, well, I do hope that the fact that we've sort of exhausted the questions and comments does not mean that we have answered all of the questions, because I'm fairly sure that we haven't, and hopefully that will give you some inspiration to try some new, interesting things and see what you come up with. Let me reset for a moment. Okay, proposing a topic for next week. This could be a multitude of topics as well, and I don't know whether this is a good time or maybe a bad time to propose it. What about interference, locating, interference, and solving? Now, we have both, I don't know that I want to talk so much about man-made direct interference. At some point that would be good to talk about, but I think we're going to have a public program about that at some point in time, and so maybe that's not so much appropriate yet. But we have plenty of issues with regular noise interference coming from other pieces of equipment that haunts all of us a lot. Some of that is close by us, and we could do well to learn to locate it and perhaps get rid of it. Other stuff is further from us and is going to be harder to locate. But if anybody would like to make a comment on whether they like the idea of that topic or do not or whatever, I'm open to a few seconds of discussion about that for next week.
Kevin, when you talk about interference, you just about got to talk about various categories of interference, because that's a wide open subject.
Well, that's true, and I did sort of narrow it down to equipment interference. We could certainly talk QRN or natural interference, but that's going to be something that we're probably going to be able to be less likely to solve on our own, because that's going to be more atmospheric related. So I think a majority of what we're going to be talking about probably is equipment that is generating noise of various types. And again, yes, there are various brands of that we could talk about that affects us in different ways. So yes, I think any of that probably is something we can talk about next week, and especially ways that we could, number one, locate it, and number two, restrict it, filter it, otherwise get rid of it. So any other comments on that from anybody?
WIQ again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably the one that has plagued amateur radio operators for the longest period of time is, as a vehicle ages, anything that's bolted together can come loose, start vibrating, and make noise. So that's a good subject also, is how to track that down and what have you. But it's also hard to track down because you try something, it works, it don't work. You try something else, you just keep going into possibilities.
Okay, excellent. All right, so vehicle noise is certainly one of those things that we're going to have to deal with, and that we've somewhat dealt with in the past, but it's worth including here because it does affect us. Thank you. I've got that written down too. All right, so that solves our query for next week. I will get that on the web page as soon as I can. And again, comments about the net, questions either about the net or for the net, or topic suggestions, please address them to elmers@ncarc.net. Please remember our YouTube channel is streaming the net and will provide a replay of it so that you can review it later. And any comments about past nets, we're interested in those too. Those are things we can certainly go back and address perhaps as well. So anything you want to share, please do. We'd love to hear. I'd like to know if we are addressing the things that you'd like to see addressed. And I should have made another mention of that at the beginning of the program. But those of you who are still listening, let me know if we're touching subjects that are important to you, or if we need to reorient our subjects to or include other things that you would find important. All of that helps me out a great deal in trying to do the plans for this, and so any help you would like to offer would be greatly appreciated. So thank you again very much. We'll be here again next week. And I wish everybody a 73 and have a wonderful week. And the repeater is now open to normal use. This is N7GES clear.
Kevin.
This presentation was brought to you by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.